Hi everyone, a rapidly melting Dole Whip here with Rhyme Signatures, the nerdiest music review this side of being a grotesquely overrated use of frozen dairy produce and an acidic composite fruit that plagues the menus of a popular theme park brand. And today we're going to be doing a review of the new Pineapple Thief album. It leads to this.
What have you done? It's the end for us. Into cold, dark heart.
There are some bands out there, no matter how hard they try, no matter how many records they put out, and no matter how many times they try to innovate and refresh themselves, they have never risen above an overall 7 out of 10 in my books. A good band, a decent band, a perfectly satisfactory band. A band who've never arguably put any foot wrong per se, but in the same breath they've never wowed me. Never had that one standout release that really shook me to my core and made me sit up and pay attention past a cursory, yeah, that was alright, I guess. In case you hadn't seen where this was going, the Pineapple Thief are one such band for me. They've been perpetually on the edge of something truly excellent, constantly blue-balling my expectations and hopes of them, but outside of the fantastic What Have We Sown from 2007, the band have consistently failed to leave a genuinely lasting impression upon me. Founded in 1999 by frontman and principal songwriter Bruce Soord, the band has had numerous lineup changes throughout its 20-plus year history. But the current setup of the band consists of Soord on vocals and guitars, John Sykes on bass, Steve Kitch on keyboards, and Gavin Harrison, yes, that Gavin Harrison, on drums. And it's honestly a pretty solid arrangement. The band communicate well with each other, they understand each other's strengths and weaknesses rather admirably, and are arguably the most consistent and impressive lineup the band has seen. So, where do the Pineapple Thief and I meet? Where did I get on this express train, and what drew me to them? I started my journey with the band with 2008's Tightly Unwound, and found them from a recommendation that read along the lines of, imagine Porcupine Tree, but more Radioheady. And that's pretty much the most accurate and succinct description of any band I've ever come across. Yes, folks, this band is extremely Radiohead, especially in their earlier days. But I honestly found it to be a little bit to the detriment of the band. I always found myself thinking, wow, this band sounds just like Tom York and the Lads. I really fancy listening to OK Computer suddenly for some reason. Ultimately, the influences from other bands were too strong for me in their earlier days. But as the band progressed through their career, they found their footing a lot more, and developed a sound that felt unique to them, that felt like no one else other than the Pineapple Thief. But I must insist though, as much as I've always peripherally enjoyed the output of the band, I've never been bowled over by anything they've put out. It's always just been nice. A pleasant, easy listening, non-threatening kind of indie prog rock that's never pushed past any kind of comfort zone to produce a series of albums that stay rigidly within the boundaries they've established for themselves. I mean, don't get me wrong, sometimes their sound is precisely what I'm looking for. I honestly think that the Pineapple Thief are one of the absolute best bands out there for bridging the gap into progressive rock. It's mainstream sounding enough to get people on board, but there's enough dynamics in their compositions and instrumentation to keep the prog veterans satisfied as well. It's a nice blend of contemporary sounds, classic 90s quasi-grunge, and skillful artistry of sound to keep your attention across their output. But ultimately this safety, this niceness, is just as much the band's Achilles heel as it is their greatest strength. I've never felt excited to listen to a Pineapple Thief record, and I have to say that this latest effort, whilst undoubtedly their strongest in years, still suffers quite heavily from being largely formulaic in the grand scheme of things. The previous records before this one honestly just flew right past me, like whew. I listened to them a whole bunch, but in truth I can't remember a single riff or line from them. 2018's Dissolution kinda slapped though, I had a pretty great time with that one, and while I don't feel that It Leads to This quite reaches the level of Dissolution, this is still a reasonably enjoyable slice of Soord's predictable but comforting songwriting. The mood across the record is nicely consistent, being evocative in some ways of Gazpacho's signature gentle melancholy, with a nice sense of minimalism and enjoyment of the space between spaces, with some empty parts ringing out to create a suitably ominous and thought-provoking atmosphere, which I do enjoy quite a lot. The opening track of Put It Right is an especially good example of this, and I feel this is a very strong opener for the album, immediately introducing the listener nicely to precisely what they can expect from the 40-minute ride ahead of them. There's a definite focus on a bassier, more drum-driven sound to a lot of the tracks on this album, but songs like Rubicon and The Frost are some of the few that allow Soord's guitar work to take front and centre. Now, while I would never call him a spectacular guitarist, he's certainly become adept at writing riffs and lines that stay well within the expected framework of the music, and some of these tracks do show this off nicely in places, but ultimately they're not particularly memorable. In all honesty, I think that's where my chief criticism of the album lies. For all of its winning plays, where it embraces its atmospherics and melancholic drama, it's a record that sort of just comes and goes for me. There's precious few engaging hooks or memorable moments across the runtime. Although it's not completely bereft of earworms, it's certainly not the album's strength. What the album does do right, though, is it is a remarkably refined and cohesive demonstration of what the band has been building to. It's almost a textbook definition of what the Pineapple Thief means, and for a band that's so often being compared to their influences in their early days, it's honestly really nice to hear them feeling so confident in their established sound and groove. I can sit listening to this album and feel the Pineapple Thief. I can appreciate how much this record speaks of who they are and how relaxed and intimate it gets at times. Ultimately, I find it leads to this a slightly frustrating listen though, because for every great track on here or moment where the band really grabs me and keeps me engaged, they let me slip through their fingers like grains of sand in the wind the very next. When this album is good, it's genuinely fantastic. Its strongest moments are when the band embrace the minimalism of their atmospherics and seek to craft music that says more when it says less. But then there are the moments where there's what I can only really describe as generic indie prog rock, where the guitars feel flat, the melodies are uninteresting, and it manages to sound just like every other album the band has been making for the last 15 years or so. The lack of adventurism, of experimentation and drive really brings the album down in places for me, which is only made the more frustrating when the record truly soars. Now, I've not regretted or been especially disappointed with my time with this album though. For all my frustrations and quibbles, it's largely down to my own expectations of the band running maybe a little bit higher than they should do. I've always wanted the Pineapple Thief to be more than what they appear to be on paper, to be more than just an indie prog band, and I think I keep getting these expectations because the band keeps flirting with the idea of pushing past their boundaries, but never really manages to do so. Make no mistake, I stand firm, and I believe this is the best the band have sounded in years. The production and mixing is wonderful, the bass and drum work is especially commendable, and Soord's vocals and lyrics are absolutely on point throughout the whole experience. I just wish it was a more, interesting album from a purely dynamics perspective. There's far more interesting progressive rock out there, and there's far more interesting indie rock out there. It leads to this kind of lies awkwardly somewhere in the middle, managing to fully satisfy neither my prog or indie desires in a meaningful or engaging manner, and it leaves me slightly exasperated as a result. So, what else can I say about the Pineapple Thieves? It leads to this. Yes, I know, my opinion is hot garbage, my taste is awful, how dare I not say lovely things about this record? Look, I get it. I understand the appeal of the band, and I understand the angle this record is going for. I just ultimately feel that for all the record does right, there's simply not enough on here to merit repeated listens for me. I feel like I'm walking through a local crafts market, looking approvingly at the various handmade trinkets and sweets on offer, but finding that there's nothing that really demands my attention enough to do anything other than carry on walking from stall to stall until I eventually find myself out of things to look at. If you are a die-hard fan of the band, I can absolutely see this album being a solid gold bullseye for you. It's the most concise and confident sounding they've been in years. I just can't help but feel that the band really could be so much more. I mean, what happened to the band who put out a 27-minute long epic in the form of What Have We Sown? That's the kind of spirit and progginess I miss, the kind of music I know they're capable of, but they've never really explored fully since. I don't know, maybe I'm just an old fart clinging to the ghosts of the past, but I fear that before going into this review, the Pineapple Thief were a 7 out of 10 band for me, and I'm afraid now a 7 out of 10 band they shall remain. I'd still recommend streaming this one though, see if it's your kind of jam. There's more good moments on this album than bad. It's just that at times it's a little boring, a little frustrating, and carries a constant feeling of this could be so much better. But hey, your mileage may vary. I'm always delighted to hear differing opinions to my own. This review is hardly gospel, of course. I am but one man on the internet after all. I've always been a bigger fan of apples anyway, compared to pineapples. This is all, of course, my opinion, guys, as you know, so if you have listened to this record by the Pineapple Thief, please tell me what you thought of it in the comments down there. If you did like this video, please do give it a thumb, please do share it around with anyone else who you think would possibly enjoy it, and please do consider, as always, subscribing to the channel for more content. I'm going to leave my link tree down below where you'll find all the various places to find me on social media, so please do drop me a follow if you want to see more about my daily life and adventures outside of YouTube. But until next time, guys, as always, keep your rhyme signatures extremely odd.